White Knuckle is one of the most interesting roguelikes I've played in recent years. It's a first-person climbing horror roguelike, which I know is a lot and is quite unique, and there's a lot to talk about, so let's just jump right into it. First off, let's talk gameplay. Yeah, it's a first-person climbing game, so as you can see, I have two hands, and I can grab onto different things to climb over, and I've got a jump, and as you're climbing, you can control how you want to move around with it. You've got stamina. Basically, the gameplay overall, I would say, is fairly straightforward. There aren't that many mechanics to get used to, but mastering those simple mechanics is a whole other story. You've got a really neat inventory system where you can just open the screen like that, grab stuff, and just literally place them wherever you want on the screen, and whenever you want to just open up your inventory, you can just grab something and use it. And that by itself is simple, but also takes a lot to get used to, and it takes a lot to get comfortable just using while you're climbing. Because for instance, right here, as I have stamina, if I want to use like the little can I got, I have to drink it and I have to drop it as I'm still holding on to something. That's most of the game. It's just getting used to the physics and the mechanics and just trying to experiment, considering that, well, there is a lot going on as you're doing so. Where the game shines outside of its simple mechanics is the environment and the overall ambience, followed by the stuff that you have to deal with outside of just climbing. You're going to be encountering a lot of obstacles, and not just simple little obstacles. We're talking like really spooky monsters and spooky ooze that's going to be following you, and you're always on a timer. I don't even know where to get started because there's a lot to mention in that regard. Well, first off, the thing I have to mention about this game is that it's a very, very challenging, punishing, stressful game, which can sound awesome for some and not so much for others. I wouldn't recommend this to everyone, but for those of you who think that sounds interesting, then, or you're in for a ride. I'm going to try to keep this review spoiler-free, but I am just going to be mentioning a few aspects of later in the game because it is pretty important with a lot of the points I'm going to be talking about through the review. This game is still in early access. I think it's fairly far along in its development as I'm playing it. There's a lot to do in this game. When you boot up the game, you're going to be seeing a lot of different options, but obviously the big thing in front of you is going to be the campaign mode. This is a roguelike that has a campaign, and I think that's honestly 90%, maybe 80% of the game is a campaign. There's also an endless mode, which I think is more fitting to the roguelike aspect, and there's also some challenges, unique challenges, as you would expect from a game like this, kind of like Portal in that regard. And actually, there's a lot of comparisons I can make to Portal overall. It's like a horror Portal. Now, the endless and the challenges, they're cool, and I'll talk about them a little bit later on, but obviously, the campaign, when you start, you always start from the same beginning. You always get the same items at the beginning, and then as you climb up and up, the levels are going to be randomly generated, quote unquote. Not so much. It's more predetermined room layouts from a library of possible rooms, right? And when you first start playing, you're gonna be stuck on that first biome for a while. And honestly, I could imagine that a lot of people will unfortunately not get to see the really cool parts of this game. And this is where the game gets really interesting, and that's not too more of the spoiler stuff, which I'm not gonna get into much. But if you look at the trailer, which there's pros and cons to seeing the trailer of this game. On the pro, you get to see amazing and awesome, crazy things you did not expect to encounter in a game like this. Like completely different biomes, including, well, again, I can't talk about it, but some really different things from the start of the game. So it's kind of like spoiler, but it also kind of pushes players to continue playing, considering that they might get stuck for a very long time on just this very beginning biome. It honestly feels like the game originally just had planned to just have that very first biome be the entire game, but as they continued developing, they were like, hey, you know what, we can do something completely different, and since there's a campaign, it's only much later, and it feels like a completely different game. Which I have mixed feelings about it, because every time you start a new run from scratch, it doesn't feel great in my opinion. Especially since this is a, once again, quote-unquote roguelike in my eyes. Now, yes, it does fill in the description, theoretically, randomly generated, permanent death. There are passives you could find, but the passives aren't anything too different than what you start off with. They just kind of enhance the mechanics you start off with, the root of it all, right? Some passes are terrible compared to others. It doesn't really feel like you have different builds and that every run is completely different. Nah, you're always starting from scratch, so it's a game that feels pretty punishing when you start over. Now, you can unlock some shortcuts. Much later, you can find ways to permanently unlock shortcuts. But they're not really shortcuts, in my opinion. They're much, much, much harder to go through these biomes. Some of them are insanely hard, and you barely actually progress much faster than if you would go the normal route. So I appreciate them doing that, but also not really, because it just feels even worse going through a shortcut. So overall, I think my biggest issue with the game in general is how crazy punishing it is and how you just always have to start from the beginning. And doing an entire run is long. It's over an hour of really stressful gameplay where any mistake can cost you the entire run. So in that regard, let's talk about the roguelike elements, right? So you've got randomly generated levels. There's not that many, in my opinion. They're all fairly well crafted. It doesn't feel like it's random climbing spots put everywhere. No, it's like pre-built large areas that you can just find out of, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 per biome, it feels like. So once you've played it a few times, you kind of get used to seeing the same stuff over and over again. But as you progress, you are going to be encountering, again, those passives. They are cool. There's very few of them. I think once you get to the very, very last area, you only get 2 to 3. Some of them are pretty useless, in my opinion. Some are much, much, much stronger. We're talking like double jumps kind of stuff. And in a game like this, having double jump, oh my gosh, lifesaver. You'll be encountering random items. Every single item is a consumable. And I know for a lot of people that sounds like, ooh, not great. But in a game where everything is a consumable, you are going to get used to having to use those items. And honestly, using the items, even the simplest items, require a lot of practice, which is cool, because just getting in your inventory as you're climbing and using it takes some time to get used to. It's a really very high skill ceiling game. Which, once again, is why I wouldn't recommend this to everybody. Now, to circle back on the difficulty aspect, I have mixed feelings about it, because this is a game that doesn't really explain a lot of things to the player, and I think that fits the theme of the game, because it's pretty mysterious, it's really creepy, so not everything is explained to you, so you kind of have to experiment. And experimenting in this game, it's cool because you get to discover things yourself and you feel pretty happy after you understand how an item or a consumable works. But once again, it's a game where any mistake can cause you the entire run. So I honestly had to start looking things up, even though I haven't been playing this game for a crazy amount of time, just because I didn't want to lose a very long run that I was like 1 hour deep, and where I had a new consumable, and I just didn't want to risk using it and like screwing with me. And I feel bad. I hate having to look up things. I rarely ever do until like I finish a game or I really don't understand how to progress. But in this game, it felt almost necessary, to me at least. And that's just, again, linked to how the difficulty is. Some might like this kind of stuff, some might not, similar to like Souls games. But once you get past an area that you've been struggling with, oh, it's such a good feeling. Until you then just miss a gripping point by just a few frames, and then you just lose your entire run. Now, in that regard, they do have save points. But the save points, again, are mixed feelings about it. You get to find some discs, and if you get to a particular part in the run, you can then save your current run in this spot, which means that if you find this area and then you die later, you will respawn at that area. But you only have that for a limited amount of times, so you can only have like 2 or 3 lives per disc, and actually just sometimes just 1. And going backwards, again, is it's better than starting over, but sometimes it's kind of annoying, especially since sometimes you will get only 2 lives in one of the disc areas, and then 1 life that you had in the previous checkpoint. And when you lose those 2 first lives, you then go all the way back to the last section, which is almost like 40 minutes before, and at this point I'm like, I might as well just start a run over. I don't know. I do wish the game was a little less painful. It is one of the most stressful experiences I have ever had in a video game. And I've played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games. But again, it's a pro and a con. Now, obviously, I do want to talk about the audio visuals, the overall environment, right? So the game has this, I don't know how you call it, pixel art grindy, which I like quite a bit, especially when you encounter different creatures later on. They are really creepy. There are some super scary things you'll be encountering. And as I mentioned previously, there is a bit of a Portal-esque influence. You have a constant voiceover saying like, warning, something bad is happening kind of stuff. It's not as comedic, naturally, but it's still pretty funny. And in a way, it is kind of like a puzzle game at times. When you have the time where you're not constantly running away from something, having to figure out where to place like a pylon to find a good place to climb. And when you have time, it can definitely feel fairly puzzle-like, which I like. The game does a great job at always making you feel like you are not powerful, you can't kill many things, and the big monsters that follow you, they always feel like you have no chance against them. And I think it's pretty fitting for a horror-themed game. And the music and audio overall, I find really, really nice. There's very limited amount of music. When the music comes in, since there's not many of it, you really get to notice it. There is a particular sound cue when the ooze gets close to you, which is the first environmental hazard that you'll have to deal with. There's this high-pitched, like, sound that is really unsettling, and you hear the water coming up from an audio standpoint. It's really creepy. Some sound effects are pretty loud compared to others, but other than that, I really like the actual sounds and music in this game. It's really unsettling. But yeah, so overall, White Knuckle, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. Overall, I love it. It's a very unique game, and in this day and age, I think unique roguelikes, for me, are always going to be really cool and fun to experience. I like the fact that the game is very skill-heavy, very hard, very rewarding when you get past the stuff, but man, I do wish they would tone it down a little bit. It feels very punishing, and considering that the game doesn't explain a lot of things, it's a game where you have to experiment, but you're always scared to experiment. Because even simple things like jumping while you're against a wall. Early on, you might do that, and then you realize that if you hit something above you, it might just boop you off the platform, and you might just die. The amount of times I've died when I first started playing the game just because I was just not completely sure how the mechanics worked. It was still early, so it didn't feel terrible, but later on, when you have to experiment with more things, especially since the gameplay does change fairly drastically, it's a lot. But if you can get past that frustration, let me tell you, the game really gets surprisingly impressive once you get past the first part. I do wish that the first part, once you've gotten through it, that they would allow you to have a shortcut that's an actual shortcut. But I feel bad for anyone who hasn't gotten to experience what comes next. And I can confirm that not many people have, because I've been able to look at the percentage on some of the actual achievements on Steam, which is a shame. Now, if you want to see some of this stuff, you can just look at the trailer, because on their trailer, they show a lot of stuff, which I find surprising. While it's a spoiler, it did push me to keep on going, because I was like, oh wow, there's a lot more to this game. In any case, this game is impressive. I wish there were more passives. I'm a big roguelike fan, and again, I consider this a roguelike. I like the idea of having a little bit more upgrades that are maybe less impactful, because right now, for a run entirely, you'll get 2 of them roughly. I kind of wish it was more like 5 to 6, but you tone down some of the effects maybe. I think that would be pretty cool. If you're looking for a skill-heavy, stressful horror game with a fairly unique gimmick, then I would say definitely try this out, because again, since this is a game I can't recommend many people, if this remotely looks interesting, then I think you might really want to give it a shot. Even after completing the campaign, a lot of roguelikes that have a heavy campaign usually are not super replayable after completing it, but the endless mode in this game is pretty cool. I haven't dived too much into it, but it does feel like if I ever wanted to climb and be really stressed, I could definitely pick this game up again. So even though I have quite a lot of mixed feelings about this game, the fact that this game is so unique and honestly really rewarding once I've been able to go to the end of the campaign, I'm gonna give this game a solid 7.5 peppers out of 10. Yeah, that's about it.